excited to host this conversation today. And this really special conversation is being sponsored by SWBR Architects, a longtime partner of the Eden Alternative, and one of the best firms that you can work with, especially for small home design for nursing homes and assisted living and other elder care settings. So big thank you to SWBR for making this possible. So we have an amazing group with us today, and we're going to be talking about lessons that we can learn from the role of elders in natural disasters in other parts of the world. You know, we are in an unprecedented situation with this crisis, this pandemic we have going on in our world. And one of the things that we know is we need elder wisdom now more than ever. So I'm really excited to welcome our three guests to the show today. So we have Emi Kiyota, who is an environmental gerontologist and the founder of Ibasho. Emi, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about you?
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for the invites today. I'm so excited to be able to share the story that I have to say elders really created. It's really, I cannot really take credit because it's all about what they have done. So I founded Ibasho 10 years ago, and Wyatt is actually a founding board member with us. And Alan Power, who we created these principles together for Ibasho. I have last 3 years, I've been working on fellowship to really try to do some research on how to aging in place for middle income and how to create the city that is dementia inclusive. And you know, just my heart is always that how can we include elders into decision making for a better environment.
Great.
And thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you, Emi. We're so glad to have you here. Anne, want to tell everyone a little bit about you?
Sure. I am unbelievably, I guess, thrilled to say that I've been working in long-term care since 1974 when I first got involved with the Gray Panthers and eventually with the National Citizens Coalition for Nursing Home Reform, which I was one of the founding board members for that as well. But I am a social worker. I've been an administrator, and I've loved working in long-term care with the people who work there and, of course, with the people who live there. And for the last 10 years or so, I've particularly focused on people living with dementia in residential care. And in that same context, I'm also, I do a lot of work with Caring Kind, which was formerly the Alzheimer's Association, the New York City chapter, where we've been working on special projects related to palliative care for people with dementia. And also in 2010, I was a founding board member of Music and Memory, the iPod project.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's great. Thank you so much, Anne. Thanks for joining us today. And last but not least, we have Al Power. Oh, you are muted, Al.
What, me, technology? Okay, hi everybody. Great to see you. Thank you, Joe. Great to be on, and it's a pleasure to be back. I was on a couple of weeks ago, and I'm happy to be back. I'm a geriatrician educator, practiced both in private practice and in long-term care for many, many years, and recently have been traveling, doing education and consulting around issues related to aging, but also particularly with people living with a diagnosis of dementia. And have authored a couple of books, Dementia Beyond Drugs, Dementia Beyond Disease, and currently embarking on a new book with Dr. Jennifer Carson, exploring ways of creating inclusive communities for people living with dementia. And so it's great to be here. As Emi mentioned, I have had a chance to work with her on helping in the background with Ibasho, and I'm really excited that people get to hear more about what her organization is doing.
Thank you, Al. And we've got a bunch of people joining us watching live. And so we're so glad to see all of you here. And so those of you who are watching this live, feel free to put questions and comments in the chat box, in the comment box, and we will do our best to respond to those. But let's start out. So Emi, I first met you and learned your story of your work at the Eden Alternative Conference. I guess it was 2014 maybe, and I was just astounded with what had been accomplished and the stories that you told about Ibasho and how it got started and what's going on even today. And so I don't think everybody knows about Ibasho, but everyone should. So would you tell everyone a little bit, or as much as you want to, about what is Ibasho? Why did you start it? Where did it start? Give everybody the scoop.
Yeah, so English is not my first language, so I kind of wrote it down a few things. So I might be looking down and up. But Ibasho is actually a principle-based approach. It is like 8 principles, which is look here, which is downloadable for free now in our website. We just wanted to create a program and a space where it is really decided by older people. And we really wanted to create a place where they can actually find opportunity to contribute to something. So everyone has capacity to do something. You know, we have people might be teaching English in Japan, and some people are doing farming, some people making tea, some people with dementia, they participate to do dishes. But we really wanted to create a place where older people will be able to care for others, not being always a recipient of care. So this one actually was not started with disaster first. I started in the US thinking that social isolation was a huge problem. And I was working in nursing home for the design part of it at that time. And I realized there are so many wisdom and experience. It was just kept in the building, not being able to be used outside. So I was very struck by the fact that we're just not using and not even listening to them. So we created the Ibasho 2010, I think, at the end of the day. So why I started, I'm going to have to read a little letter that I wrote to myself so that you understand why I started Ibasho. It was 10 years ago, almost. The time to be happy is now, the place to be happy is here, and the way to be happy is to make other people happy. I found this quote in elementary school in Bhutan when I was working on senior housing project for Bhutanese monks. This quote resonated with me because it captured the gap between our current approach to elder care and what elders want. Everyone wants to be useful to others regardless of their age, physical, cognitive, and physical or cognitive capacities. However, the current system treats elders as people for whom we have to care for, rather than treating them as a people who can contribute to their community. The Ibasho approach recognizes elders as valuable assets to their community, empowering them to be change agents who change the prevalent narrative of aging and the social role of elders. How can each of us be a part of co-designing a shared future for elders across the globe in which aging is not something to fear, but as an opportunity to appreciate the potential within us all for meaningful growth throughout our lives? Everyone, so this was my, just a simple quote really spoke to me, and I'm sure that everybody else has a similar experience. I lost my grandmother in a nursing home, had the dementia. You know, she was much more than room numbers. She was individual. So that's how I started to do this. And, you know, this COVID-19 situation really reminds me of the day I was watching TV, what was happening in Japan, all this tsunami happened. It just such a helpless feeling of like, I want to do something. But I'm so grateful that I didn't really rush into just try to save elders. We were able to focus on recovery time, and we were able to sit down with elders. And what they taught me was that being a recipient side for too long make them feel very helpless. Well, at that time, 11 months after the disaster happened, all they wanted was to do something to others. So if I could, you know, just sort of having a conversation with my family member, and Al is like my family members in the US, to really discuss about, you know, how we can, focus on what we can recover. And when we do, how can we actually bring the wisdom of elders? That's what I'm very passionate about. I don't really have a crystal clear ideas about how to do it now, because this COVID-19 is a very different type of disaster that I experienced in Japan, Nepal, and Philippines, which physical infrastructure was destroyed. But social infrastructure was a little bit more strong, maybe because of disaster happened. But this COVID-19, we don't see building being collapsed, but we feel that social connections and infrastructure has been heavily affected. And how can we bring our social fabric back, and how can we heal the society? I really like to be able to start discussion about how to integrate elders. And I am asking for everybody's wisdom.
Thank you, Emi. And when you were just saying that, when the elders in Japan said, we want to do something, we want to be part of the solution, I think all of us are feeling that right now. We feel very helpless. We feel like we're supposed to, sit at home and that's how you do your part. And all of us are searching for ways to give back to the world. And that doesn't end because you're a certain age, right? And we all need that. And usually the narrative is, let's take care of older people rather than what role can people play. So yeah, wow, I love this. So Anne, Al, jump in. Let's have a conversation here about what we can learn. And again, like Emi said, this is a very different situation. Nobody's experienced this before. But what are some of the things that you all have learned that maybe can be applied here?
I'd love to share a story from back around that time that I think really speaks to what Emi said. It's kind of ironic, I guess, because Emi started thinking about social isolation. And then her first project had more infrastructure damage. But now here we are back to your original vision from over a decade ago. And the great Japanese earthquake and tsunami happened in March of 2011. And I remember I was working along with Chris at St. John's Home in Rochester at that time. And we had a neighborhood team meeting, and we talked about, is there anything we could do? Because Emi suggested maybe there's something that the elders could do, at St. John's to show some solidarity. So we met, and one of the elders said, well, it's supposed to be a goodwill gesture to make origami cranes, and maybe we should do that. And then someone else said, well, 1,000 cranes is supposed to be really good. Let's make 1,000 cranes. And when I floated the idea, I have to admit, we got some pushback from some of the team members saying, they don't need cranes. They need cranes like that set up buildings, and they need money, and they need hospital supplies. But we realize that elders have a shared history. They have a shared history, world history, a shared age, a shared history of trauma like World War II. And they were both living in settings where they were marginalized and could often not do for others. And we went ahead and did it, and we got people involved. We got people with arthritis, people with dementia. We sit there and hand in hand, help fold the cranes. Got our 1,000 cranes, put them in a box with some messages. So we had a local volunteer who spoke Japanese do some calligraphy for us and sent them off. And Emi sent us a video of people opening the box, and it was so moving. People just breaking into tears that somebody 10,000 miles away would actually care enough, to do that for them. And so I think the potential for connections is so strong, and we just tend to gloss over and say, oh, that's not going to help. But we don't understand what's important to elders who can't do those other things that maybe disaster areas need to have done.
I think, it's interesting too. I mean, this is a small thing, but as many of you have probably heard, in New York, every night at 7 o'clock, we go to our windows and our balconies and we bang pans and we applaud. And I've been doing this now for almost 3 weeks. And it is a moment, when for just a little while, all of these people, everybody in their own spot, and they do it and that noise gets louder every night. And so I think one of the things that, if we can take that pause here to think about, since so many of us are in our isolation ourselves, is to consider that before COVID, there were many people in nursing homes who were very isolated, and to think about what that is like, the kinds of things that Emi is talking about, that I think for me, one of the most important things that we can go back to is really that in the littlest ways every day, people in residential care, whether they are very able in certain ways or whether they have lots of limitations, either in terms of physical movement or trouble thinking, that they still can interact. They can still express comfort or pleasure or discomfort. And it's still important, whether it's in the midst of the epidemic or in everyday life in nursing homes, to really respect that and support that in every way that we can. And that voice has always been there if we were listening.
Yeah. Emi, I remember when you spoke at the Eden Alternative Conference, and this is more than a right now problem, but I remember you saying that if we continue to look at elders as nothing, and I'm paraphrasing what you said, so forgive me, but it was really the gist of it was, if we can continue to look at elders as just care recipients, it will bankrupt all of our societies, because we can't do that. And so bringing back the value of older people and that real role to play was critical in so many ways. And talk a little bit. So how did it happen that you went to Japan, and talk a little bit about the Ibasho Café, and how did that happen? What did you learn? What surprised you? Because and maybe to set the stage a little bit, it was how many months after the tsunami?
Yeah, it was 11 months after the tsunami happened. We went there, but I must say that tsunami area 11 months later was still a huge disaster, because magnitude was just so great. So it was debris all over the place. It was nothing was functioning at the time. But we went and just see what we could do. We had funding promised by Honeywell corporations, try to help elders. And the World Bank was also helping us to do the research. So we went and sat down and just really, I just said, I just have to sit down with all the people and see what they want to do, because I really don't know. And I'm not from the same area. I'm from the South. This happened in the North. So when I was going around and sat down and just talked to the elders, it's just one just intriguing story is that it was a woman who was 85-ish person at the coffee gathering and temporary housing with pink sweater and hoodies. It says Gap on it, 85 years old. She said, I am so grateful. I have food and I have clothes to wear and I have house to, just stay. But it's been 11 months. It's very difficult to be receivers. And if I could do something, if I could write a letter to this person who gave us something, I would be happy to do it. But I really don't know how, because no one asked. To me, that was a problem. So we talked to other elders, and it was very clear that everybody wanted to be able to find something to do useful. Some people can do big things, some people can only do small things. But that was important. So we sat down and older people and asked them to bring their grandchildren, and also reached out to the nursing home communities to have like babies to older people in a workshop, about 50 people, and just try to figure out what we wanted to do. And I think it's universal. Everybody wants to do something to do with food. It's just like eating meal together. It is therapeutic thing for everyone. So they wanted to create a cafe. So we decided to start with cafe. So we created the cafe that is now grandma's cafe for grandmothers. They wanted to create grandmothers and grandfathers cafe for younger generation. So they wanted to teach younger generation. So that is really the way they wanted to lead the resilience of the community. But was it easy? No, because older people are conditioned for a long time to be a receivers and independent role, and the society kind of put them into that box. So the expectation is low, and elders' expectation themselves is low. So they said, well, are we too old to have not-for-profit organization to run this? So we needed to really have realistic conversation and challenging to say, this is, can't you just make a better tea than younger people? They're like, sure, like, then you do it. We just needed to have that kind of conversation. We also visited long-term care facilities because a lot of older people just afraid of going there. They don't want to go there. So we went around and then asked them, so these are the options you have. Any of the places where you can actually fit in? They said no. And they just needed to create their own place. So, there are multiple different ways to really, it's almost like a push their back to just do the things they already knew what to do. Basically, that was a challenging part.
Yeah.
So now we have a cafe. It was 7 years ago. El Power came and visit one time. But it was a small cafe, but now we have farmers market, they have farms, and they have ramen noodle shop, and they do all kinds of class to children. And this is evacuation center where older people can actually run with very traditional way without water and food. And, they can actually serve as evacuation center for the community members. So it's grown, and I think it's about, there's so many people actually came over time, and they're growing more than ever. And they actually open now. They haven't closed Ibasho yet. There are certain services they closed it. But again, older people, it was important for them to serve for socially isolated elders in their community because they know them. So they kept tables and chairs outside and have enough distance so that they can actually sit in the same place to help them out.
Oh, that's great. And it's such a difference from, the traditional model is a senior center where younger people run everything and provide services to older people. And this is completely the opposite. And Emi, I think you had said that didn't the group at the first Ibasho Cafe even turn down government funding because they didn't want anybody they wanted to run their show?
Yes. It's in fact they approached them to do a memory cafe, and Alzheimer's cafe or memory cafe because it was growing number in Japan, and they said no, we won't take it because anyone can come. People with dementia can come anytime. We don't want to set the time, and why do we want to just decide the time and the date so that people will be stigmatized on the top of it? They can come anytime. So they kind of, they said, no, that can be done somewhere else but us.
That's great. And we have a question in the question box here. And I think, what you were just talking about with that, what you did is it wasn't Emi rushing in to save everyone. You sat down and talked to people about what they wanted to do. And I don't think we've found this space right now to ask elders, right? How do we want things to be right now? How do we want the future to be? So this question is, can you describe what it means to really listen to elders? I believe sometimes we believe we're listening, but we may not actually be doing what you're talking about. So any of you, if you want to talk about what does that really mean? What to really listen?
Well, I have to say one big talent that you need, or just like learning that I had, I just needed to be very patient to wait until they make decision. And I was telling myself that it is easier to make decision myself. It's faster, but it is not about me. It's about them. And I have to just wait. And I will, lots of time, I have my own timeline. Elders has a different timeline. If it's a group of elders, it's a completely different timeline. So I just needed to really help them to make decisions. That's how I kind of learned to listen. But I'm sure Anne and Al has more wisdom to share, I bet.
You know, something that I've heard over time, a few very special, extraordinary people described. One of the most important things ascribed to them was that when they asked questions, they asked it as if they really wanted to know the answer. You know, and I think that's a really strong piece of this puzzle is, do we really want to know, and do we communicate that well? Because that's a part of it. It isn't like, you know, oh, isn't this a nice day, as if you're waiting for the yes answer, you know?
Yeah, that's a great point. Al, what about you? Your thoughts on that?
You know, it's a lifelong skill we have to develop, and I need it as anybody learning to shut up and sit in my hands and listen to what people have to say. But it, as Emi says, it's done on a little different time frame. Even speech and transmitting a message can be done on a little different time frame. There may be a story first. There may be a little bit of a circular approach, or it may be about what is not asked instead of what is asked. But my work with elders, and my work also with elders who are living with a diagnosis of dementia, has actually made me a much better listener, because I realize the burden's really on me to understand. And when I don't take the time, that's when things go wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, so any other takeaways? So Anne being a board member, Al having visited, which cafe did you visit?
I visited the Ibasho Café in Japan, in Okinawa. I went in March 2015, so that was 4 years after the tsunami.
Okay, okay. So with your experience working with the principles of Ibasho, what takeaways do you have from those principles, from your experience there, from what you've learned, that we can apply during this situation we're in, this disaster that we're in?
Well, if people haven't respected the coronavirus enough yet, I guess my first lesson when I arrived in northern Japan was the respect for Mother Nature. Because Emi mentioned there was debris there when she went. When I was there, the debris was gone, but the areas that were affected were flat, the ground was graded, and construction was about to begin. This is 4 years after a 1 hour tsunami event. And people were still living in trailers and temporary housing because they still did not have homes 4 years later. So it's pretty amazing. To see the cafe, I think 4 years later, is to really bring to fruition all those things that Emi is claiming are true, because it is true. There is excess disability. There is learned dependence among elders in society. There is marginalization and silencing, either actively or passively, of elder voices. And I because I've worked closely with Emi and heard the stories, I knew the struggles of trying to facilitate a group that thought they should be given the answers early on. And some of the other political things behind the scenes, getting the cafe going, all the licensing, all that. But to see it at that point, it was like it had always been there. There was no question about who was running the cafe. There was no question about how decisions were being made. We were welcomed along with a group from Help Age and some other people that happened to be in the area, as well as some groups that were forming Ibasho Philippines. And one of the wonderful things that happened was the group started visiting each other. And elders from Japan actually went to Philippines after the typhoon, showed them better construction techniques so they could build more sturdy housing. The Ibasho Café was a farmhouse that was put together by elders who knew how to do old style construction without nails and screws and fitting wood together, and knew some of Emi's universal design principles about leaving open potential spaces for life to happen. And to walk in and to see that there were people serving tea and sushi, and that there were kids in a children book library who were doing reading and then doing some cooking classes, and to see people stopping in for the Wi-Fi, and the mayor stopping by, and all these things just happening, the garden starting because it was March. You just see that it takes some trust in the fact that we're not really teaching elders, we're kind of rediscovering what they already knew and giving them a space to share it. And as you said early on, listening and being willing to be open to having them take that lead.
I think everything that's happened with Ibasho since it started has really You know, it's worked in Emi in particular, certainly has worked, you know, in Nepal and the Philippines and Japan. And yes, they were 3 different kinds of natural disasters, and they were, you know, different cultures. And so, you know, and not every path was identical and different resources. But nonetheless, the guiding principle from beginning to end, and certainly now, is to listen to people, to find a way to listen and to help their voices be nourished and grow. And there's no question in my mind, you know, that we don't know exactly, you know, how to make that happen most effectively in this current situation. But we do know that it will depend upon our willingness to listen and to pay attention to those voices as we go forward. Nobody knows right exactly, except that we know those voices matter.
Yeah. Another thing, Emi, I've heard you say, and Al also, is that, you know, and so often we strive for perfection in senior living settings, but community is messy, right? And figuring out the solution in a situation that nobody's ever lived through before is probably going to be messy also, right? So do you have any thoughts on that you wanted to talk more about?
Yeah, I think I always use a quote that I've learned. I'm not quite sure if I just top of my head if I remember, but it's just like I always a question that someone say we create community for elders. I'm like, what kind of concept is that? It's just like community is something you negotiate and create your own way. It is a messy thing. It is not something that it's given possibly. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, just like we shouldn't really force ourselves to think that we can create community for other people without involving them. And I think imperfection, that's one of the biggest principles that I really always preach about. It is really to create a flexible plan, you know, where other people can perfect them, but it can be it's a temporary, you know, level of perfection that changes over time. Communities' needs are changing, individual needs are going to be changing. But, you know, if we design the space in the program that is done by, like, modified by elders, rather than like professional always go in and just try to help them out to modify it, that's the huge difference. So how can we design and program in a space that is modifiable by community members? And also just don't wait until perfection to start. You know, if you just try to come up with perfect solution for 3,000 people, then all of a sudden you can't really do anything because there's no such a thing as a perfect place for 3,000 people. So, you know, just what you can get, what you have, and it's just what's important is really start to do something. And, you know, remembering that we can always modify it. We can always make it improve by the people who are going to be using it and running it.
I think one thing that's going to be very important for residential care facilities going forward is, as we know, for many people living there, one of the most important or the most important relationship they have within the setting is with their direct caregiver. And yet direct caregivers are often not given the kind of support and encouragement for that connection, let me say. I think that, you know, they are often put in the position of having to complete a lot of tasks, whether or not they listen to the person in terms of how daily life goes on. And I think we need to find a way, certainly for managers, for administrators, for planners, to really make sure that direct care staff, anybody, you know, who really relates to the resident in the facility, to be authentic in the way they listen to people and to reward that, because that often does get left out, and yet they are there on a daily basis. And oftentimes it is the task rather than the connection or the relationship which is encouraged.
That's a really, really great point. And when you start focusing on being a community and less on we're here to provide all this customer service for people, you can get to more of those authentic relationships. So we have a couple of questions in the box. So Debbie Van Straten says, Emi, could you speak to the part where the elders didn't believe they could still do it? And she also said average age of board members.
Yeah. Well, I'm just not gonna disclose my own board members, including Anne. But one of the parts that we asked the community to do Ibasho, we create our own organization for operation organization. So Japan has not-for-profit organization that runs whole show, and they have their own board members. You only can be 75 and older normally. And I really don't know the average age, but I have a feeling 78-ish. When we started doing this, and we just said, oh, why don't we create not-for-profit to run this? And the elders said, oh, are we too old to do that? And I said, well, what do you mean? But, it's not only elders, but the city workers also had issues. But it's like, are you guys really starting this? So it was just all societal issue about ageism. It is not really like direct, but it just like it sits in our body, just like it's just so deep in our body, I have to say.
Emi, I think I remember you mentioning to me that there were some people that were upset that this was putting too much stress on older people. And I remember talking to you about that. And
yes. So some people thought that we can't put older people into work. We can't make them work. So my response was, you can try to put them into work. They won't do it. And I think they only do this because this is what they want to do. If they don't want to do it, just like I can't really make them work, really. So I think, just the people thought that idea of like empowering other people, it's just like we have to do everything for them because that's better, just that is another preconceived notions that society has, just older people, like a grandmother shouldn't be doing it. I have to make tea for her, although she can make better tea, or she, we are taking her social role away, but we really have to just look at differently. But there are always resistance because not everybody see the same way sometimes.
It takes some time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
People think differently. So there's another question. What role does or has decision or design thinking played in co-creating solutions with elders?
I wouldn't use the fancy word like design. So, design thinking, I get that. The design thinking is, that really helps. But at the same time, we go a lot more basic first, just learn about, we really have to help elders to believe that they have something useful to contribute, that we can actually make things happen together. That's the first thing that we have to try. And design thinking is a little bit too linear to me. When you do a community design, it is the linear kind of improvement doesn't really help. So I wish that I could use, just design thinking way of doing things. But, the Ibasho, we understand where the principles are, but, we choose to be a little bit messier, just way of making decisions, because it's always a solutions, but that's not perfect. And that, that will be changed, that another solution will be better over time. And we don't really know. So we just try to leave this imperfection so that people can actually perfect it at each time. Maybe Anne and
I love that. And Cheryl George just commented, what a beautiful thing.
Well,
yeah. And Al, let's jump in.
I don't know. I think it's hard to improve on what Emi said. It's the organic nature. It's the organic nature of growth. It's not something that you can map out. And you've all seen the meme of how I thought my life journey would go and then how it really goes. And, you have to be open to that. You have to. I know from writing. I know from writing songs too, that you start out with an idea, and if you are so attached to it that you can't let the little voices tell you something's not working, then you fail. You've got to be open to following things, and as we often say, just sort of figuring it out as we go, because we can't know everything. There's no way we can know everything, and when we think we know everything, then a pandemic hits. And
yeah.
That every organization, the most beautiful care homes you've seen in the world, were not designed for coronavirus.
Yeah, true.
And you start all over again with, okay, how do we maintain social relationships? How do we work around our design? That's life. and I know Tom's Wicker put a question in there about the voice of the elders changing over time, and I think that's part of it too. I think we all change over time. Yeah. And that's the nice thing about the organic nature and the consistent leadership of elders, is that it does engage in those important conversations, in those, as Ann says, authentic relationships that continue to reassess how things are going, continue to grow and to change, because the group of elders that designs that first environment may not be the group that is living there or working there or using it 5 years later.
I think we've all been in many homes at this point. Beautiful ones, very compromised in terms of ones that are very compromised in terms of space or amenity. And I have no doubt that you'll agree with me that, community can be found in any one of those situations and not found in any one of those situations. And it can be sometimes facilitated by space, but it does not. You can't make that the solution. And that's where I think I've seen what I think to be a few mistakes along the way. Is years ago, there was a well-known home in Philadelphia, and they're the ones that told me the story about they had this gorgeous design, and they, worked on it way ahead of time, and they laid it all out. And then they moved in, but they forgot to talk about how they were going to use it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And community, and I have seen over and over again, where if you don't keep your ear to the ground and pay attention and keep community going no matter what, you lose when you depend on just space or just anything really. If you don't keep close to that community, you will lose it, and that's a shame.
Yeah, and and that's such an interesting thing. We see that very often with people building new buildings and thinking everything's going to change. The magic happens, and I was talking with Russ Chapin, the Pocket Neighborhood architect, and he said to me, it's like if you think about building design, and the building, that's the hardware, but the culture and the way you live in that is the software. And when you put the right hardware together with the right software, that's where you see great things happening with community building. But one without the other makes it more challenging, but kind of interesting.
I love Emi's metaphor that the building is like a glove, and what happens in daily life and operations are the hand that moves the glove. And if you're a surgeon with ski gloves, or if you're a skier with latex gloves, you're not going to be very successful, because you haven't. What we do is we often design a glove first, then try to fit the hand into it without even knowing what's supposed to happen.
That's a very good point.
40 years ago, when I was at Village Nursing Home, which was at that time before the renovation, which was badly needed. It was really, there were 4 people in some of the rooms, and it was dark, and the rooms were small, and it was, and they were group bathrooms and the whole works. But one of the residents in the home was the woman who was the original Auntie Mame, the one about whom the book was written. And she was a resident in the home. And when we were raising money to go ahead with the renovation, we had lots of press when they found out she was there. Now, you never knew quite what she was going to say. So, we absolutely gave her, free rein to say what was on her mind, but we held our breath every time. And I can still remember this one wonderful moment when a reporter was there and asked her what she thought about the village nursing home. And, we all held our breath because, of course, really physically it was pretty grim. And she said, it's okay. She said, but it has a lot of spirit, she said. And I'm a great believer in the spirit as the best healer of all. So that was my very early reminder.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's a great story. And we have a comment that it's interesting that memory support programs engage elders as contributors who have learned behaviors that are useful to the community, such as making soup, folding laundry, setting the table. But there is less of this kind of engagement in residential living, where customer service is the mantra. Why is that?
Well, I think it's the way we.
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's just like that's the challenge that we have in our own mindset, really, because we don't really truly trust elders. I feel like, just like if one of the elders told me, if you trust us, just don't let let us finish another half when you do the first half. You just have to trust us first completely. I think a lot of time we kind of make a stage for them to go up and just do something and just like clap hands and say, oh, that's great. It's just like, no, they're not really entertaining us. They will be able to do the whole show. But I think that's something that we are forgetting about it. I actually wanted to, because I've learned from one of the elders, I wanted to share the knowledge that I've learned from him before it ends. So one of the elders told me that, human being, like a people actually walking backward, like walking towards future, facing your back to the future. So just basically we are just like looking back and just walking toward our future. So when disaster happen, you can't see it because you're not looking in the future, but all you can see is the past. So if you have a longer life, you have longer experience. What you can do when you keep walking your life is to make best decision and best guess so that you're not going to fall. But if you just like disaster happens, pandemic happens, you just really don't see what's going to come. So you might fall into it, but how to get up and how to not fall deep is really based on your experience. And I feel like that was such a great sort of metaphor for us. We cannot really avoid disaster. We cannot avoid pandemic. We could, it'll be great if we could. But, what's important is like how we can actually use this opportunity to learn better. How can we build back better? This is like international development. They use the term build back better. Just of course, older people are vulnerable and they get affected in the disaster, like natural disaster, and pandemic happens in COVID-19. It's older people are disproportionately affected, but they're not homogeneous population. Older people has different skills in different situations. So they are much more resilient, they're more resourceful. How can we actually make these things better? Yes, we wish we wouldn't have any more pandemics or natural disaster, but it is not going to be the case. We really have to learn to live with that. And how can we build back better? I think we've been questioned. Used to be, it was how to make housing better for low income people. But nowadays, again, inequality is happening throughout the world, even within the US. People in the color are affected more. What can we do? So those are the kind of conversation that I really love this to happen. And I'm just hoping that somehow Ibasho can find a way to be able to facilitate that. And again, when you have first name basis friends, if you know more people with first name basis, the community bounce back better. And people talking about social connections. But it is important that we have to have it before disaster and pandemic hit. So what's important is a normal time to really pay attention to the issues. So, you know, in a way, this pandemic, we can take as opportunity to say, you know, social connection was already disrupted even before we come in. So now we give them like an iPad. It's not going to do much because they don't know anyone. So what can we do for the next one? It is very important. And I think that's something that I'd like to be able to, you know, just have everybody take home message. And so I just wanted to share that. Sorry, just
no, I think that is it's such a good point. And I mean, we've been talking recently about, you know, that isolation, how deadly isolation is, and that it's a health crisis. And so you're right. This has been going on, and how do we? I love that. Build back better.
Emi's bringing a couple of points to mind with me. One of them, when she was talking before about trusting and letting things happen, and it gets back, I think, to Daniel's comment too, is that one of the things that we try to do in creating a perfect environment is we try to create a failure-free life, failure-free activities. And when you do that, you basically take all meaning and purpose out of life. Yeah. Because none of us has ever accomplished anything worthwhile unless there was a chance that we might have failed. And so it's not how do we create a failure-free environment. It's how do we create an environment where people can negotiate and safely fail from time to time, so that they can find those better ways. And the other thing that when she talked about the inequality, and this is one of the great things about Ibasho, bringing marginalized people back into the mainstream, is that, you know, one of the big things we talked about when we did our residency together, it's been a big concept in many different areas, and that is the idea of resilience and community resilience, particularly after anything from a natural disaster to a pandemic. The more you have inequality in society, the more you have a group of people that are kind of the have-nots, the less resilient the entire society is. And so by helping engage people in true community, we actually are creating, we're not only leveraging the wisdom of the elders, which is lost in the current society in many ways, but we're also building more resilience because we have a better infrastructure, as Emi says, before the disaster happens, instead of waiting until we are where we are now and saying, where did we go wrong?
It's interesting because a lot of people commented before that, oh, you could do this just because Japan, Nepal, and Philippines, they had disaster. That was really a wake-up call for them. We don't have that in the States. How can we work on this? And I feel like, you know, this pandemic is not quite natural disaster, but, you know, just what the disaster actually bring up is existing issues just to the surface. So it's kind of like you just finally have to see it. So I think, like, Japan was the same, you know, aging was happening. It was issues. This tsunami really brought up to, you know, just maximize that we cannot really do something. We have to do something about it. And I think in the US the same, social isolation was there already. And now we see it. So, you know, why don't we just do something about it?
Yeah, thank you. And any last thoughts that you want to share with people?
No, I honestly think Emi and Al have really summed it up beautifully. There's just no doubt in my mind, you know, in all these years that I've been doing this work, that we have to go back to listening to people. That's just bottom line. That's it, you know. And I have to say, everything important I've learned, that's where I've learned it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hear things that you never thought you would hear from people, right? When you start asking what people really think, the assumptions that we have in our own heads are often wrong. So.
Well, I think in addition to not just what they say, but what it means to them to have somebody listen to what they're saying. That was a very, very early lesson in my experience, and I've seen it happen over and over again. The fact of being listened to is restorative for people.
Oh, this has been, I can't believe we've been talking almost an hour, but I could listen to the three of you talk for days on end. So, and I know everyone that has joined us felt the same way. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to everybody who joined for this live broadcast. And Emi and Ann and Al would love to have you come back later to talk as we start. Like you said, we don't have clear answers right now. We have a lot of really good questions that we need to start looking at. But if you'd be willing, I'd love to have you come back a little bit later, and maybe we can talk about some of the things we've learned. So the Eden Alternative, we are doing these Facebook Live shows every Monday, and sometimes we're doing them on Thursdays as well. This is our way of really giving back and helping to support people during this time. And again, a big thank you to SWBR Architects for sponsoring this and being such great supporters of Ibasho and the Eden Alternative. We really appreciate that. Thank you, Chris Angevine, Meredith Martin, who are behind the scenes doing our production. And so the upcoming topics, next week, we are going to be focusing a lot on workforce. So we had a staffing crisis. Again, what Emi said, right? There were conditions that were already in place, and now they're being brought even more to the surface. And we're going to be talking with Ecligo Workforce Solutions about how do you recruit team members right now and make things work and keep people. So they'll be on Monday. And then on Thursday, we're talking with a company called Immediate. And what Immediate does is it allows employers to get people their pay right after they earn it. Because right now, people can't wait 2 weeks to get their paychecks. So they're a great new partner, the Eden Alternative, and I'm thrilled to have them joining us next week as well. And then on May 4th, we have Jack York joining us to talk about technology. And that's always a fun conversation whenever Jack comes to the show. Al, Emi, Ann, thank you so much for spending your time with us.